Welcome everyone to a very special episode of Legends and Lectures. I'm here with the one, the only Rory Naismith, who is about to tell us about King Offa, who I actually have a lot of questions about because up until this time, I didn't know very much about him. I knew about his Dyke, which I think many people do. And we'll discuss whether or not he actually built it and what for. But before we get into it, Rory, can you please tell everybody who doesn't know you who you are and what you do?
Of course. Yes. Well, I am Rory Naismith. I'm Professor of Early Medieval English History at the University of Cambridge, where I work in the Department of Anglo-Saxon, Norse, and Celtic. And I'm also a Fellow of Corpus Christi College, which any of you who are into medieval manuscripts will recognize the name of because it's got an alarmingly high proportion of the major Anglo-Saxon manuscripts that survive from anywhere.
Mhm.
And yeah, I've recently been writing about Offa of Mercia, this king who ruled in the 8th century, and this is the book which
Thank, thank you. Yes, I did
is
not get the book
out
in
recently.
time. So,
Hmm.
but King Offa and his big dyke. I did promise
Yes,
I would leave off the puns. We're just gonna give that one for
there's one. Well, you've also got Offa and his great big dyke. That's not one I've used before, but I'll bank that one.
you can keep that one in your pocket for later. So as you say, Offa ruled the Mercians from 757 to around
Yes.
796. So do we know
Yeah.
that those dates are absolute?
We do. We know about the date when he comes to the throne from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, this year-on-year Old English record, which comes from the 9th century, but it's got information going right back to the early Anglo-Saxon period. It says that he came to the throne in 757. He somehow beats off, kills, defeats this very short-lived character called Beornred, who
Mm.
is king of Mercia for a few months before him. We do know the exact date on which he died, which was the 29th of July, 796. So he's on the throne for 39 years, which is one of the longest reigns of any Anglo-Saxon king.
And yet, for 39, that is an immense time. And yet
Mm.
we don't really know that much about him. So for those who, well, now we do maybe with your book, but for those who don't know, can you tell people where Mercia was or still is?
I can, yes. Mercia roughly corresponds to what's called the Midlands in England, so the bit in the middle, basically. If you imagine a line going roughly wiggling about a bit west from London, that's the Thames, and then the sort of spike that juts into England from the North Sea about halfway up on the east coast, that's the Humber estuary. Those mark the northern and southern borders of Mercia. To the west, it's bordered by Wales, and you mentioned Offa's Dyke. That's something which is marking the boundary of Mercian control there. And then on the east, its edge is marked by the fens, more or less where I am now in the area around Cambridge. So it's a big block of territory. The core of it is the area around what's now the West Midlands. So places like Lichfield, Tamworth, Repton, these are major centres in the Upper Trent Valley. So this is the heartland of the King of the Mercians that they expand out from in the 7th century and pick up all this other land around it.
That's a huge swath of land. That's
Mm.
pretty big. But again, he ruled
Yeah.
for 39 years, this huge
Mm.
chunk of land. But so
Mm.
why is it that we know so little about him hitherto?
It's mainly because the tentpole sources, the core sources that people have relied on for the mainline version of Anglo-Saxon history ever since the 9th century, are written primarily by Offa's enemies and rivals. So they don't have that much to say about Mercia in this period, and what they do say is pretty critical and pretty negative. So yeah, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, for instance, really only has a few annals that talk about Offa. They talk about how he fights some battles without much information about why he's fighting them. It makes him sound like just a violent maniac who likes battling for the sake of it. They talk about how he kills a saint, which is never a good look in the very Christian early Middle Ages, and also how he creates his own new archbishopric to diminish the Archbishopric of Canterbury, which again is a bad look if this chronicle is probably written by people at Canterbury, which we think it was.
Also, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I think it's Ethelbert is the saint. He wasn't
Mm,
sainted at the time that he was killed, which we'll get into. So it
mm.
really does paint him in a bad light. But did he really do it? That's what I always ask on this program specifically is, was it really a thing? Did it really happen? And as well, we have questions about certain things that happen in Anglo-Saxon Chronicle because it's accurate up to a point. If you go back far enough, it's quite mythological, especially when it talks about like the history of Kent, which is
Mm.
amazingly very similar to the history of Rome. So you have to think about it. So in this Anglo-Saxon Chronicle or Chronicles, because technically it's many things.
Yes.
But it was put together, Anglo-Saxon Chronicle was put together 100 years after Offa's death. So how accurate can it be?
We can't know for sure. That's part of the problem. We don't really have much from within Offa's kingdom, within his own time period. Certainly nothing quite like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. So you're absolutely correct. It's it's got to be taken with a pinch of salt. It's generally thought that the chronology, if you account for certain sort of slippages that some of the manuscripts have got, where all years are off by one or two or three or something like that,
Hmm.
its chronology is probably right. Most of the things it describes probably did happen, but whether they're telling you the whole story or telling you that story from every possible angle, that's another matter. And that's where I think the crux really comes with Offa, that there's an awful lot they're probably not telling us, which you can sometimes get hints of from other sources. And what they do tell you is coming from a very pro Wessex or pro Canterbury source. The Canterbury side comes in from probably an earlier set of annals that was incorporated into the Chronicle, and that gives you information from there relating to the 8th and early ninth centuries. But yeah, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is obviously still helpful, but in many ways it's also something you have to look past and get beyond and turn to other sources as well.
So why was he known then as a warlord? Is it just something that his enemies have said, but or did he actually fight in all of these battles that he claims?
Well, he did fight in a number of battles. That's true. There's even one interesting case of this that's not in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. It's only referred to in this generally rather fishy text called The Lives of the Two Offers, which is put together in the 13th century at St Albans, but which is drawing on lots of authentic information about Offa, including some from sources that are now lost. And these mention a battle he fights against the East Angles at somewhere called Felthard, which is not referred to elsewhere. So yes, he is fighting quite a bit. He's fighting against the English, he's fighting against the Welsh. Bear in mind that he's on the throne for 39 years. So I think if you measure the number of conflicts we know he's involved in against the length of his reign, I don't think it's that crazy. I don't think he's a particular warmonger. I think that this is just down to what the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle chooses to record, and then the fact that this becomes the main foundation of what people thought Anglo-Saxon history was in later times. That's the side of Offa that they could see, basically.
So there was a lot of propaganda that was made up about him. So let's talk about his wonderful episode with Ethelbert. So
Yeah.
who was Ethelbert and why do people call it why did Offa get the title of the father-in-law from hell?
Well, Ethelbert is king of the East Angles, who lived in what's now Norfolk, Suffolk, eastern part of England. And really, there's very, very, very little known about Ethelbert. The main thing we know about is that he gets killed on Offa's orders in 794. He has his head cut off. This is in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and it's a very bold statement to the effect of in this year, Offa had Ethelbert beheaded. There's no context, there's no background. It's just that. And we know that by the 10th, 11th centuries, he's being culted as a saint. They're thinking of this character Ethelbert as uh, a holy man. They're thinking of him basically as someone who was unjustly killed by Offa. And why he was killed is not given away in the early sources. It's only hinted at in this much later 12th century saint's life, which is written about him. And as you and your readers will probably know, saints' lives are the archetypal take with caution text. They're
Yes.
filled with legend, they're filled with sort of recurring literary tropes. You know, that all saints are holy, ergo, a lot of them operate, I thought, operate in the same way. So it's it's not the most reliable of texts. All that said, it says that Ethelbert wanted to marry one of Offa's daughters, and so he sets off from East Anglia to go to Mercia. He brings a couple of his sort of live-in poets with him to tell him some stories along the way. It's a lovely, vivid text. And then when he gets to near Hereford, which is where Offa is based at that time, Offa's wife, Cunithryth, starts to sort of whisper sort of bad advice in Offa's ear. She tells him that this figure is coming to attack him. She tells him that Ethelbert means him harm. And the text goes really out of its way to try and absolve Offa from blame, because in their mind, if Offa does order the execution of this guy in the legitimate belief that he's intending to kill him, that's okay. That's a perfectly legitimate thing for a king to do, and it's Cunithryth who gets the blame. So this text suggests it's basically a marriage negotiation gone badly awry when the mother-in-law steps in and gets a bit too involved. So in actual fact, Offa's not necessarily the father-in-law from hell. His wife is the mother-in-law from hell.
So I think one of the legends says that Cunithryth, she was so jealous of her daughter's happiness that she persuaded Offa to murder Ethelbert. And you know, when you think about this, you go, I don't think this really happened, but it's a fun
Yeah,
story. Yeah,
it is.
exactly.
And it's the idea that he wanted to come and marry one of Offa's daughters is in and of itself fairly plausible. We know Offa had at least three daughters. Two of them had married the other Anglo-Saxon kings, one in Wessex, one in Northumbria. There's also at one point a marriage negotiation with Charlemagne. So Ethelbert thought he wanted to join that club, and Offa and Cunithryth had other ideas.
So let's talk about Offa's Big Dyke.
Sure.
So did I think that that is the one thing that we can say that most people who learn about English history or Welsh history will know because you can literally cross it. It's sort of like it's sort of like
Yeah.
looking at Hadrian's Wall. It's an earth banking ditch that you can actually physically see. It's labeled, but did he actually build it? Did he actually build all of it at the same time? And or was it only named after him?
These are very, very difficult questions to answer. And I should say on this that much though I love Offa, I have not spent nearly as much time as I should plumbing the depths of the Welsh borders, getting permission to dig up parts of Offa's Dyke and try and work these questions out. And in fact, even though many other people have tried to do that, it's really very hard to say when a particular mound of earth was first dug up and put there. So many excavations have really turned up no solid dating evidence whatsoever. And what I've written in the book is very much indebted to some of the latest research on Offa's Dyke, which has been led by Ian Bapty and Keith Ray, who've done all sorts of important work there. And it probably is, at least according to these latest findings, built by Offa. They think that it is a single operation. It is a single edifice. Obviously, it's not all built in one day, but it's built in a single effort, and
Mhm.
also that it does run more or less the whole distance from the Irish Sea in the north to the Severn Estuary in the south, with only a few breaks in the middle where it coincides with rivers. And there aren't even as many of those as was once thought. So, in short, yes, it probably was built in one go. It probably was built by Offa. The reason why it's associated with Offa is because another ninth century source, written by this character called Asser, who was Alfred the Great's biographer and came from St. David's, he says in passing that this great big dike running between the English and the Welsh was built by Offa. So by that stage in the 890s, there was no ambiguity about it. They thought this was Offa's dike. And by Anglo-Saxon standards, that's pretty close to the source. You know, that's only 100 years after, so that's considered fairly reliable. But we all continue to work on and study and support excavations of the dike, and so who knows? One day somebody might find a big inscription saying this was all built by somebody else, or it was all built by Offa on this one particular day in seven whatever. We may yet be surprised.
Why would he have built it?
That is another good question. There's a long history of debate about this. It's sometimes been thought that, quite plausibly, because it's a whopping great big dike with a big ditch on the other side of it, that it's got a military function. It's designed to stop or at least seriously impede a military attack from west to east, from the Welsh towards the English. And I think that's probably right to a degree. It's a huge effort, and it would have been a genuine barrier. It wouldn't totally stop a few determined people who wanted to get from one side to the other. But
Right.
if you've got a lot of people with with horses, potentially with other livestock, potentially with a lot of baggage, then it would be a much more serious obstacle. It would slow them down enough that there could well have been a Mercian patrol who spotted them and attack or call in reinforcements. It may well be that there was lots of support going on with the dike that is much harder to pin down, possibly because it wasn't ever finished. So that's the military stuff. I think it's also got several layers of kind of symbolic meaning too. It's, like I said, a great big dike, a great big ditch as well. Originally, it would have been probably, I think, about 3 or 4 meters in height
Mm.
above ground level, and then another 2 or 3 meters down on the other side. So it's going up and down really quite a huge distance, and even today, it's pretty impressive. And it's sited carefully such that it will always look impressive from the west side in particular. People who are in Wales looking up at this will have Offa's Dyke glaring down on them. It's on the heights. It's in some places where if you look across it, you'll be able to glimpse all these sort of sunlit uplands of Mercia off to the east, while you're stuck in, rainy, gloomy Wales behind the dike. It's a statement of power. And there's another way in which I think it's a statement of power too. There was a clear recollection among people in England at this stage of Hadrian's Wall and the
Hmm.
Antonine Wall, these great big linear defences built by the Romans in the north. And those had been built as far as Bede and Gildas, this other early British historian, thought those had been built in order to protect the Britons, the Romano Britons, from the hairy, scary barbarians who lived to the north.
Yeah.
So the Picts and other characters like that. So for Offa to build another linear defense, which runs from sea to sea, which was how they described the Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall, it was in a way resurrecting that idea and resurrecting that claim to Britain. So in a sense, by building this dike, there's not just the military stuff, there's not just the putting the Welsh in their placeness, there's also a statement that we, the Mercians, we, the English, are now the rightful, legitimate inhabitants of Britain, and you, the Welsh, are now the barbarians that we have to keep out.
Which is funny because the Welsh are the OG Britons.
Mm.
I was thinking about
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, they see it the other way around, but I think this is a subtle and clever way of Offa to try and communicate to them how he thought they were now, the Mercians were now the dominant figures.
I suppose if you put the palisade on the high side, yeah, that would
Mm.
absolutely work. But as you said, so
Yeah,
he never finished it, or at least we think it was never finished.
probably not. No, I mean it's as it stands, it's mostly just the dike, the ditch, and sometimes a sort of support ditch as well that may have been there for getting earth and things like that. There are one or two places where it's thought there might be a kind of fort, a kind of supporting fortification of some sort that's near to the dike, but not actually part of it. Um, yeah, it's not like Hadrian's Wall. That's worth emphasizing. It's not like Hadrian's Wall where you've got a fort, a whole network of bigger and smaller forts along the wall, near the wall. You just don't have that. It's just the dike and the ditch. Apart from these one or two places where these other possible fortification sites have been found. So that's one reason why it's sometimes been thought that it's not finished, or that it was meant as, to some extent, a kind of token defense rather than a real in-depth defensive line that would have held back a real army.
So other than his great big day, what can we say that he actually did that made him stand out as a king? Because we think of somebody like Alfred the Great,
Yeah.
and we understand and know his accomplishments because he had such a biographer who maybe
Mm.
bigged up a little bit of his accomplishments. Oh, just a little bit. So what could we say that Offa's accomplishments actually were, other than building this thing that he may have never finished?
I think that in many ways, Offa's achievement is to set a pattern, to create a model for how you put together and run a large multi-part Anglo-Saxon kingdom.
Hmm.
And this then becomes the pattern which is followed by Egbert of Wessex, Alfred the Great, Athelstan, others who come afterwards. They follow in the footsteps of Offa in how you do this. Paradoxically, his legacy isn't really directly felt by Mercia itself. His dynasty dies out just a few months after him because his son, who follows him on the throne, dies just a few months following his father. And then Mercia itself in the ninth century is crippled by Viking invasions and then overshadowed by Wessex in the latter part of the ninth century. So Mercia doesn't go on to have this glorious, influential history that Offa probably hoped it would. If things had gone differently, we might all be living in Mercia now rather than England, or we might just think of England as having a very, very different history and centre of gravity.
I blame
Um,
Athelstan for England.
well, yes, exactly. No, I think that's crucial. This idea of England is something that's coming a lot later, and in fact, Offa was sometimes criticised by historians of the past for not turning his achievements into the kingdom of England, the kingdom of the English. He was seen as falling short or kind of reverting back to something that was less, being kingship of the Mercians. I don't think that's really fair. I think that they just haven't yet developed the idea that that was the goal, that was the prize they should all be aiming for. I think that instead, Offa wanted to be king of the Mercians. That's how he started. That was how he ended. That was what he was going for. He wanted to be the biggest, best, most powerful king of the Mercians there should be. And the kingdom that he expanded just meant a larger, more powerful kingdom of the Mercians.
How many other kingdoms, or should we say maybe petty fiefdoms is a better term, were around him
Yeah.
at this time? We like to talk about the heptarchy, but was the heptarchy really a
Yeah.
heptarchy? Eh.
Yes. Short answer is no, it
No.
wasn't. No, no. I mean, it's a term with an interesting history because it's actually been around since about 1100. It's
Mhm.
it's a shorthand that was developed by Anglo-Norman historians who looked at Bede, who looked at the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and thought, "Oh my God, there's all these little kingdoms. How on earth can we make sense of this?" So they just said there's about seven of them which seem to be important. Let's call it the Heptarchy. And in actual fact, there wasn't really ever a single time where you had seven kingdoms dividing up the whole of England into those units. It's always a bit more layered and complicated than that. By the time Offa becomes king, that process of winnowing down these kingdoms has gone quite a long way. So the major ones left by that stage are Mercia, which we already talked about, Northumbria to the north, East Anglia to the east, Wessex to the southwest, and then Kent in the southeast. Those are the major players by the middle of the 8th century, but there had been lots of others in the past, and Mercian kings and some kings of other kingdoms before Offa had moved in a world where what they sought to achieve was really kind of supremacy, overlordship of these other kingdoms. They wanted to be acknowledged as the most powerful king, the dominant king. But that didn't necessarily mean that you would turn all these other units that were subject to you into a single kingdom. They'd still have their own kings, they'd still do their own thing in most respects. They just agree not to fight you and to fight your enemies in turn if you had need of them. Um, that's how Offa's predecessors operated, and that's the model which he changes.
Do we know how many other domains Offa eventually oversaw?
Ooh, well, it's hard to put an exact finger on the number of them because they don't list it in those terms. Basically, he becomes king of everything in England south of the Humber except for Wessex, which roughly corresponds to modern Hampshire, Somerset, Wiltshire, Dorset, Devon, that part of the world. And even there, he never incorporates it into his kingdom, but eventually the King of Wessex is his son-in-law. They seem to get on pretty well, and it's clear which is the senior partner in that relationship. So Wessex eventually also becomes a kind of subordinate kingdom to the Mercians. That's the extent of his power. Mercia itself is this bit of the West Midlands. We know there are lots of subunits within the kingdom of the Mercians who often have their own long history before them. There's a wonderful and very, very complicated text called the Tribal Hidage, which sounds
Hmm.
remarkably archaic. That's just a name that was given to it in the 19th century. And it's a list of about 30 peoples in the Midlands and a number of hides or units of land that could support one family.
Is it
It talks about
100
how
yards as a height, I think? I think that's what it says.
it's a little bit more than that. There's one text from later in the 10th century which says it's 120 acres
Mm, okay.
um, is a hide. So it's assuming that's what a hide always was. It's quite a big bit of land, but it's really however much land was needed to support one notional family unit. And that would vary depending on how good the land was and all sorts of other factors. But anyway, this lists these 30 units. There were other groups on that kind of scale, a few hundred hides up to maybe 7,000 hides. There'd be lots of groups like that in other kingdoms too. We just don't have lists that tell us about them. So Offa's got all of them, and then he adds to that Mercian unit, he adds East Anglia, he adds Kent, he adds Sussex, he adds Surrey. He's bringing all of these areas under his control.
What an underachiever. Didn't even bother going to Strathclyde, really.
No.
So obviously I know you like coins. So can you tell us a bit about Offa's dinar and especially the coin with his wife on it, which I think is very cool.
Yeah, there are lots of numismatic highlights in Offa's reign. He's really the first English king south of the Humber to issue coins in his own name on any scale. There had been coins of a slightly different format produced by kings of Northumbria before then, but Offa is really doing something quite new and quite impressive in the south. And as you said, this includes coins of his queen. This is the only Anglo-Saxon queen ever named or shown on coins, one of vanishingly few English queens ever to have anything to do with coinage at all in the Middle Ages. So they're hugely exciting in that regard. They have an image of Cunithryth on them. She looks like a Roman empress. These are modeled closely on coins of, I think it's Marcus Aurelius's empress in the second century AD. Um, they're made by at least two what were called moneyers. These were individuals who produced coins. That was how they organized this at this stage. They didn't tell you what location the coins came from. They told you which individual was responsible for production. And there's about 35, 40 of these characters working under Offa, and there are two of them who make coins for his wife Cunithryth. Um, the Offa dinar is even more amazing than that, even more exceptional. There's still only one of them that survives. It's been known since the 1840s when it turned up in the collection of a French diplomat based in Rome. It's a gold coin that is modeled on a dinar of the Abbasid Caliphate made in Baghdad in the year 157 after the Hijra, which translates to 773 or 4 AD. Um, and within the lines of Arabic, which are copied, I wouldn't quite say beautifully, but they are copied legibly. You can see what the original said.
Hmm.
Within the lines of Arabic, they have added the letters Offa Rex. They have added
Hmm.
Offa the King on it. Worth saying that this is upside down relative to the Arabic, which is a clue that whoever produced this didn't really have a sense of what the Arabic said. They just thought it was jolly important to replicate all these lines and squiggles as best they could, because that's what made the coin reliable and trustworthy as far as they understood it. And yeah, there's been huge interest in this coin and what it might have been made for ever since it was found.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. You really have to see the coin to understand it. But I think I've never learned this, but I heard that because of this dinar, some people strangely think that Offa somehow is connected with early Islam, and I that's not even possible. I don't even.
Well, no, unfortunately, no. I mean, it's a lovely idea in some ways, but there's very plentiful evidence that Offa is a pious Christian.
Oh yes.
Um, and in fact, you can make a pretty good argument that the Offa dinar, rather counterintuitively, given it's got inscriptions saying there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet, that this coin was probably made to give to the Pope. Um,
Ah,
yeah,
interesting.
because we know that it certainly can't be made to be used within the Muslim world itself. It wouldn't have passed muster because it's got Offa Rex on it. That just would have ruled it out. But we do know that gold dinars like this circulated quite widely in Italy in the later 8th century. They were popular at Rome. They were popular at other places. These were how you paid large scale prestige transactions. And there's even a letter from one of the popes to Offa's successor, suggesting that he might want to maintain this lovely custom Offa had instituted of sending 365 gold pieces to Rome every year. So we
Oh.
know that he's producing gold coins to send to St. Peter's, to send to the Pope, and this gold dinar turns up probably in or near Rome. It's very tempting to put two and two together.
So why Offa for you? Why did you choose him? Was it because when we interviewed Professor Ronald Hutton and I asked him about
Yes.
why he has such an obsession with Oliver Cromwell, because I think he's down 3 books now with him, and his response was he's a big target and I like big targets.
Mm,
So for you,
okay.
why was it Offa that interested you so much?
Well, Offer too is a big target, I suppose. I remember being a teenager, being in a bookshop looking at a little book of British kings and queens, and most such books only start in 1066. This one went
Mm.
back before then. It had stuff about Anglo-Saxon kings and even about the individual Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. And I came across a paragraph about this character, Offa, and it said what he achieved. It said there's not much information about him, but I thought, oh, this seems interesting. I wonder what there is to tease out about him. And it had a picture of a coin. It had a picture of the Offa dinar. It had some information about his charters, about how he's involved with Charlemagne. And when I was at university a few years later, I did my first ever undergraduate dissertation about Offa and how his coins tell us about his kingship and what he was doing as a ruler. And this then led me to come back to Offa again and again. This happened many times over the years since then. It was 20 odd years ago now that I did that first dissertation. And eventually I was approached by Yale University Press, who've published this book now, asking if I'd be interested in doing a volume in their English Monarchs series. And it's a series I've always admired very much, so I thought that would be very nice. And they've done a number of Anglo-Saxon kings in that series recently, so I said, would they be interested in Offa? And fortunately for me, they said yes.
So they made you an
And
Offa? Sorry, I had to
they
do
made me an offer I couldn't refuse. That's right.
it. So-
They did. Um, and
You
and then
put
I
it
wrote this
you
book.
you put it out there. I had to do it. Thing is, usually sometimes I have my colleague Mark here, and so he's the archaeologist. For some reason, archaeologists cannot live 5 seconds without doing puns, and I'm usually the one who's going, but this was too good. You indeed made me an offer I couldn't refuse because
Yeah.
it's just so wonderful.
Oh yeah.
It's and so now that the book is out and it's done and it is available everywhere. As I was saying to Rory, it was only available in Canada yesterday, but now it is available worldwide. So if you are in Canada like me, it is out as of May 19th, and so this will be going out after that. So it is out, and now it's out worldwide. So what will be next on your who shall be next on your plate if not? I would love to see you do something with Ethelbert, or maybe off his wife. I think that would be interesting.
They would both fascinate. I've got bits about both of them in the book. I'm actually going to be doing a conference paper about Ethelbert in the next few months. So I'm having a think about that right now. Other projects I've got on the horizon. I'm going to be doing a short volume which gives a kind of introductory overview to the Anglo-Saxons more generally. I'm going to do a second edition of a book I wrote a few years ago, all about Anglo-Saxon London, the
Hmm.
development of Anglo-Saxon London, which is another very interesting story. It intersects with Offa because this is a major city in his kingdom. It's where he has lots of his royal meetings and assemblies. A lot of his coins are made there, so it's nice to be going back to that part of the story. And then further ahead, I'm looking to write a volume about economic and social history of Anglo-Saxon England.
Oh, smashing, lovely. When will that be out?
A while. It's not really beyond the glint in my eye stage at the moment. It's something I want to do and I look forward to doing, but it's a fair way off. The other two, the London book and the introductory book, those should be out relatively sooner, within the next year or two, probably.
Oh, wonderful. So when it's out, when the second edition's out, we'd love to have you back to talk about that.
Mm.
Because I do know about the first edition, but I hope at least we can get the second edition here on time with everything else.
Well, I'd love to come and talk about it.